Greetings everybody, welcome to my channel. Thank you all for tuning in. I'm going to start a series of videos that I'm going to talk about my top 50 favorite bands of all time. I was just kind of, for the heck of it, compiling a list of my favorite bands, not really expecting that I was going to do this video or these couple videos, but I actually was quite happy enough with my list that I decided that I wanted to share it. So here we go. My top 50 favorite bands. These are some of these bands are bands that I have been into for almost as long as I've been into music. The past 25 years since I was, roughly 11 years old. Um, a lot of these bands I've only gotten into recently within the last 5-6 years that I've been collecting music, physical music again. I started. I kind of gave up collecting CDs in my mid 20s, and then 5-6 years ago I began collecting CDs and records again, and have really gotten into a lot more bands. So I tried to give everyone a fair chance to kind of fall on my list where they may, so to speak, instead of just favoring the more nostalgic bands for me. I tried to really give a fair shake to some bands that I've gotten more into recently. So I guess with that in mind, here are my 50 favorite bands, starting with number 50. Number 50 from Glensdale, California, I've got System of a Down. This is a heavy nu metal, I guess you would call them, band formed in the mid 1990s, released their first album in 1998, and probably achieved the most success in their career with their follow-up in 2001, Toxicity. And my first memory of System of a Down would be in this era right here. I remember seeing this album cover everywhere I looked when I was 11 years old, which is when this album came out. I remember this album cover long before I remember any of the songs, actually. Over the years, I would be more exposed to some of the songs. Chop Suey, Aerials, song, from this one, like Sugar. You got some of the hits from these ones here, BYOB, Lonely Day, and I liked them. I just, at the time, it wasn't really what I was into. It wasn't really for me. The only song I specifically remember hearing for the first time is Prison Song, which when I was 19, I worked in a truck stop in the kitchen, and one of my coworkers had a mix CD that he brought in, and it was, for the most part, god-awful. There's like a lot of country stuff on it that I was not into. There was some Insane Clown Posse, which I also was definitely not into. And then there was Prison Song from System of a Down. I think it was the only System of a Down song on it. He might have had like Chop Suey as well or something, but Prison Song, I remember being on that mix. I loved it, and that ever since has been my favorite System of a Down track. But over time, I just begun to sort of realize that all the System of a Down that I knew, I actually did kind of like, and that led me into listening to the albums, starting with Toxicity, and I thought it was awesome, and that led me to, these ones, and they got a small catalog, but it's solid. All 5 of these albums are really good, and I love the way that this band can take really heavy political topics, and just mix them with goofy songs about pizza pies and bouncing on pogo sticks seamlessly. I mean, they fit together seamlessly on the same album, and if you weren't paying attention to the lyrics, you wouldn't even know the difference. But that's just really part of the genius of this band to me. So number 50, I'm going to go with System of a Down. Number 49, I feel like I would be remiss not to include the Beatles on my list. Keep in mind, this is a list of my favorite bands, not a list of the bands that I think are the greatest or most influential of all time, in which case the Beatles would be no lower than 2 on that particular list. But for me, I wasn't always that into the Beatles. I remember knowing who the Beatles were, just always knowing who they were. From the time I got into rock music for the first time, I knew who the Beatles were as well. And at first, I just wasn't that interested in them. Maybe it was just because I always heard about how great the Beatles were in a weird way, and that just sort of made me not that interested in checking it out, which doesn't really make sense unless you put yourself back into that sort of rebellious against the grain preteen stage, in which case maybe that makes more sense. But just over time being exposed to more and more of their music, I've begun to appreciate them and appreciate the influence that they had on pretty much almost everyone that came after them, and certainly a lot of the bands that I love that came after them. The first band that I was ever into was when I was introduced to Kiss, and the Beatles were a huge influence on them, especially on Gene Simmons. So eventually I did really come around and get into the Beatles a lot, and I feel like I got to include them on my top 50 list, even if though personally they're not like my favorite band of all time or anything like that. But their catalog is really divided kind of into 3 parts. You've got like the earlier kind of poppier stuff, which is fine. It's not my favorite era of the Beatles. Then you have kind of that middle transition period, which probably is my favorite era, because these are my 2 favorite Beatles albums right here. Number 1, Rubber Soul. Number 2, Revolver. I think these are both killer albums. And then you've got, of course, the more experimental, psychedelic kind of later period of the band's career, like Sgt. Pepper's, Lonely Hearts Club Band, the White Album, Abbey Road, stuff like that. And of course, to me, one of the more underrated, Let It Be. I love Let It Be. I think that's a fantastic album. And one of my favorite underrated Beatles albums here, Beatles for Sale. Seems to be at the bottom of a lot of lists, but actually quite enjoy that one. So, yeah, really good catalog. I think that it just kind of gets better as it goes on, because I really love from like Help on. Well, I love Beatles for Sale, but to me, like Help, especially Rubber Soul, like onwards, that is like the Beatles that I tend to go to the most. And yeah, I kind of feel like there's not really much else that needs to be said about the Beatles. One of the greatest, most influential bands of all time, had to be on my list, even though they are coming in, relatively low, but still, great band, and I love the Beatles. Number 48, from Boston, Massachusetts, we have one of the great late 70s, early 80s new wave bands, The Cars. I've always enjoyed The Cars as far back as I can remember. I never really got into them as a younger teenager. I enjoyed their music whenever I heard it, but it was a little bit later that I kind of got more into them, more into their albums and whatnot. And I think they just got tons of great, memorable material. Of course, you've got this debut album right here, 1978, one of the great debuts. Had it not been for the fact that Van Halen also released their debut album in 1978, I would probably go with this. It's the best debut of the year. Essentially a greatest hits album in of itself. And of course, follow that up with Candy-O, which feels like an extension of that first album in many ways. Panorama, to me, I think really underrated. A lot of great material on here. I love the title track, Give Me Some Slack, Getting Through, Up and Down. I think Panorama is kind of underappreciated. Keep that great run of albums going with Shake It Up. And finally, Heartbeat City in 1984 kind of concludes that classic initial run of Cars albums. Heartbeat City has my favorite Cars song on it too, which is You Might Think. And of course, in 1987, they come back with Door to Door, which I think has some gems on it. And of course, Move Like This from 2011, unfortunately after the passing of Benjamin Orr, is a pretty fun album as well, and really captures that classic Cars feel. So just a really fun band, really great new wave, late 70s, early 80s band. Yeah, I think they're just, ton of fun, memorable songs. The Cars, I've got at number 48. Number 47, I've got Tonic, from the mid to late 1990s. This is, to me, one of the real underrated, underappreciated of those mid to late 90s post-grunge bands. I think Tonic, best known for Lemon Parade and their hit songs Open Up Your Eyes and If You Could Only See. But they've got a small catalog, only 4 albums, but a pretty solid one, because these are all really good. On Lemon Parade, songs like Soldier's Daughter is great. The title track, Casual Affair. But actually, my favorite is probably the follow-up, Sugar. Songs like You Wanted More, Knock Down Walls, one of my favorite songs. Future Says Run, the opener is great. And Future Says Run is a great example of one of the things that I love about Tonic and what they do, is when they kind of have just a really hooky, catchy guitar riff as the solo. Future Says Run has that. Take Me As I Am has that as well. I love it when they do that. They do that so well. Some other great songs on here. Jump Jimmy, Stronger Than Mine is great. Waiting for the Light to Change. Sunflower is a great deep cut. Drag Me Down. Got the third album here, which I guess my cat must like Tonic too. Roses, Take Me As I Am, Do You Know, Liar, Believe Me. And then their most recent album from 2010, the self-titled, I think really kind of underrated in a way. Release Me, Daffodil, Send a Message, Bigger Than Both, Nothing Is Everything, Feel It Now, Precious Little Bird, Torn to Pieces. A lot of great stuff. Really underappreciated band, in my opinion. I think they don't seem to get a lot of credit, even for that era of 90s alternative post-grunge. But they're awesome. I think they got a lot of great stuff. So number 47, I've got Tonic.
I've seen you down, dancing with your demons. Hooked on the myth, if you shake so hard you'll free them.
In the number 46 spot, we're going to go hair metal this time, and we're going to go with Winger. Debuted in 1988 with their self-titled album. Put out the follow-up a couple years after that in 1990. And while these are the two albums that are probably most synonymous with Winger, you've got most, if not all, of their real big hits on here. I actually like what they did after this a lot better than these two. Winger is a band that, if we go back to when I got into a lot of hair metal, which would have been 13, 14, 15 years old, Winger was a band that I was interested in getting into. I even had the debut album and their greatest hits album kind of on my wish list for a long time, but I never got around to getting either of those albums before my taste in music started to change a little bit, and I got more into like your alternative rock 90s post-grunge stuff. And by that point, Winger had just kind of fallen off my radar. So over time, as I had gotten more exposed to their hit songs like on the radio and whatnot, 17, which the guitar riff in that song I like. Everything else about that song has aged horribly. Headed for a Heartbreak, which is okay, and Miles Away, which is okay. I do like Easy Come, Easy Go. That was always kind of my favorite of their big hits. It wasn't until I started my channel actually when the Rock Beast actually asked me to rank the Winger albums, so I had to go and listen to them all for the first time. And I actually did enjoy these two a little bit more than I thought I would. The first album we've got, I think Madeline is a pretty good song. This one has Easy Come Easy Go, which I've always liked, and Baptized by Fire, which I think is also a great song. But really, it's what comes after these two is where the real strength of this band is for me. Pull is a freaking great album. They really shed the glam on here, go for something a little heavier, a little more progressive, and it suits them well. Blind Revolution Mad is incredible. Down Incognito, In My Veins, Junkyard Dog, such a heavy riff on that song. I love it. The Lucky One, In for the Kill, Who's the One, great album here. Pull, released in '93. And then, of course, they reformed. They broke up for a while, reformed in the mid-2000s, put out Winger 4 in '06. It's an alright album, but after that, their last three albums, I think, just been really awesome. Karma, Better Days Coming, and Seven. I think collectively, this has a lot of the band's best material on them. Karma, you've got the first half of this is just phenomenal hard rock. Deal with the Devil, Stone Cold Killer, Big World Away, Come a Little Closer, Pull Me Under. Heck of a first half right there. Also really love Feeding Frenzy. Another great first half here on Better Days Coming with Midnight Driver of a Love Machine, which is kind of a goofy title, but it's a really cool song. Rat Race, Better Days Coming. I also love So Long China on this one. Just a really pop-driven song with a real heavy riff underneath it. It's real cool. And their most recent album, Seven, got some great stuff on it as well. Proud Desperado, killer lead single from this one. So, yeah, I think some of the band's best material are these most recent albums. And, of course, Pull from 1993. And this, to me, puts Winger on the list more than these two. There's stuff on here that I do like, but I don't think these two albums in of themselves would get Winger in my top 50. But for anybody that doesn't know Winger beyond these first two albums, you got to do yourself a favor and check out these ones. So, in the number 46 spot, Winger. Number 45, I'm going to go with Whitesnake. Whitesnake is a band that, again, I think I was exposed to them initially when I was a teenager with their big hit songs like Here I Go Again and Is This Love. But I think it was over time as I got a little bit more into them, and really when I heard Slide It In for the first time, when I really started to appreciate more Whitesnake. And when I started to finally collect albums again, and I picked up like this for the first time. I never owned this one prior to getting back into collecting CD and vinyl. I really freaking loved this one, and of course, Slide It In and some of these other great albums came afterwards, and that's when I really begun to love Whitesnake overall. Now, Whitesnake and Winger to me really close. Those two could almost be interchangeable. I gave the edge to Whitesnake just because they have a larger catalog, I guess, and I think the majority of Whitesnake, to me, I prefer over those first two Winger albums, so I guess there is that. Of course, I think that the 1987 album is just a pure hair metal masterpiece, top to bottom. I could do without ever hearing Is This Love again, but I've almost gained a new appreciation for Here I Go Again. I was at one point to the point with that song where I never wanted to hear it again, but I've kind of gained a newfound love for it, actually. But, Crying in the Rain, Bad Boys, Still the Night, all great songs, and some deeper cuts on here that I had never heard before buying this album. Children of the Night and Straight for the Heart. Freaking great songs. And John Sykes' guitar work on here is just smoking. Just fantastic. Another great album here, Slide It In. Just a bunch of great great songs on here. The title track, Slow and Easy, Love Ain't No Stranger, Gambler, Guilty of Love. Solid album. Great bridge album between kind of those earlier bluesy rock records and then the hair metal stuff with Slip of the Tongue and 87 here. I also picked out some of these earlier Whitesnake albums here that I really do like too. I think this is a pretty good stretch of albums here. This one's really great. Sweet Talker I think is a really kind of great song from earlier in their career, and Saint Sinner I think is a really solid album as well. And of course Whitesnake, I'm not a big fan of Slip of the Tongue, but after that they put out some albums in the 2000s. Good to Be Bad, Forevermore, and the most recent one from 2019. The name of it's escaping me at the moment, and I've even got the CD sitting over there and I didn't think to grab it. But all those are pretty good albums with some, despite David Coverdale not really sounding like himself anymore, there's a lot of great guitar work on those albums, really awesome riffs all throughout them, which is definitely worth checking out. So number 45 to me, I'm going to go with Whitesnake. Alright, and the number 40, where are we at, 44? Yes sir, we're at 44. I've got Pantera, groove metal legends from the 1990s. Even though my taste in music has definitely gotten heavier over the last couple of years, I've gotten into some heavier bands than I had really ever been into before. Pantera is probably still the heaviest band that's going to be on this list. And I've loved Pantera since I was a teenager. I don't even remember how I came across them, but when I did and I heard Cowboys from Hell, I'm like, this is the freaking coolest thing I've ever heard in my life. And eventually I did get Cowboys from Hell, and I got a Greatest Hits album from Pantera, and those were the only two that I owned back when I was younger. I did also have Vulgar Display of Power. But eventually, my taste in music changed a little bit. I purged my collection out, and unfortunately, at the time, I didn't think I was ever going to come back to liking Pantera, but I did. I sort of rediscovered my love for them, and I was lucky enough to find these 4 albums at a thrift store. I'm still missing Vulgar Display of Power. I still have to find that one and track it down, but yeah, Pantera, I'm actually not a big fan of the pre-Cowboys from Hell stuff. I checked it out thinking that I would probably like it, since I do like hair metal. I like softer things. I'm not necessarily a big extreme metal guy, but I just wasn't that into it. I ain't gonna lie. Pre-Cowboys from Hell Pantera just does nothing for me. But Cowboys from Hell I think's a phenomenal album. Vulgar Display of Power, probably their best album in my opinion. If not, maybe it's this one here, Far Beyond Driven. And I just love how they got heavier with every album too, just heavier and angrier, which is just not the direction most bands seem to take. It seems like most bands sort of lose that over time, but their aggression came out heavier and harder on every single album. But Far Beyond Driven has a number of my favorite songs: Strength Beyond Strength, 5 Minutes Alone, Slaughtered, Use My Third Arm, Great Southern Trendkill, another kind of underrated album to me. I love the title track, I love War Nerve, I love Tens, 13 Steps to Nowhere, Suicide Notes Part 1 and 2, Living Through Me, and probably my least favorite of the bunch, the last one before they disbanded, Reinventing the Steel, but still some really good songs on here as well. Yeah, they're just maybe a little bit of an outlier for me. I've definitely got other heavy metal bands on my list, but none that are kind of in the vein of Pantera, I guess. So number 44 for me is from Arlington, Texas, Pantera. Number 43, I'm going to go with Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania's own Breaking Benjamin. Great band from my home state here of Pennsylvania. And one of the weirdest things about Breaking Benjamin and me, and really pretty much my relation with any band that I love, Breaking Benjamin was one of the first newer bands that I got into as a teenager. You know, of course, we're putting ourselves back in like 2004-ish when I was introduced to Breaking Benjamin, maybe 2005. It was actually my dad who got me into them. So you would think that since I love a lot of these older bands, and my dad got me into some of them, Aerosmith, Bon Jovi, some other bands that I'll talk about later on this list. My dad actually the one that introduced me to Breaking Benjamin. He had a friend who had this album right here, We Are Not Alone. His friend lent him this album. When my dad came home from work, he let me borrow it. I put it onto my computer, and I loved it. I thought it was awesome. Funny enough, the 3 songs that my dad really liked on here was Forget It, Sooner or Later, and Breakdown. Those were the 3 songs he told me to check out that he really liked. The 3 songs that I fell in love with, Simple Design, Follow, and Firefly. Though I liked the whole album, but those were the 3 songs that just really grabbed my attention. So, there are bands from my dad's day that I actually got him into, and then he's the one that got me into Breaking Benjamin. I always thought that was kind of funny in a way. But after getting into this one, I then eventually went out and bought the first Breaking Benjamin album, Saturate, and then by the time Phobia come out here in 2006, I was kind of already a full-fledged fan of the band. This is the first album that I got to experience as a new release. I actually got this album the day before it was released. We called the local CD store and asked them if they were going to have this in, and they said, yeah, actually we have one now if you want to come and get it today. So I went over and bought it the day before and got to enjoy this one a little bit before everyone else did. But and ever since then, I've just kind of followed along right with them. You know, Dear Agony comes out in 2009, probably my favorite Breaking Benjamin album right there. They take that seemingly long hiatus in between Dear Agony and Dark Before Dawn, and this one was just, for me and a lot of my coworkers at the time, a lot of us just really strongly anticipating the return of Breaking Benjamin here. And then we got Ember in 2018, and supposedly they got a new album coming out. It seems like it's been forever since Ember's come out. So I guess we'll see if that album finally drops. But they did release that single Awaken, was it last year or like even the year before? It feels like it's been forever. So hopefully we get some new Breaking Benjamin music here in the near future. But my number 43 is from my home state of Pennsylvania, the great Breaking Benjamin. Number 42, we're going to be rocking with Dokken, one of the early LA hair metal bands to come out, featuring one of the great guitarist of that generation, George Lynch, along with, of course, vocalist Don Dokken and the guys. Dokken is a band that I begun to get into as a teenager. I had a Greatest Hits album and Under Lock and Key. Unfortunately, before I really got into the rest of their catalog is when my taste in music kind of shifted a little bit. And Dokken sort of fell off my radar. I came back into Dokken years later and discovered that there was a ton of great music that I had not gotten to when I was a teenager. And a lot of stuff that I do definitely appreciate now. And kind of wish maybe I would have stuck out some of the hair metal back end, but my musical taste shifted, and of course, back in those days, you didn't have the streaming services and whatnot that you have now. It wasn't all out there on YouTube. It was still an era where you pretty much had to go and buy the albums, unless you were into like a lot of the file sharing stuff, which I had LimeWire at one point in time, but this might have even been before LimeWire was a thing, actually. But Dokken, I think a great run of albums there in the early 80s. I was sort of lucky enough to find Breaking the Chains in a thrift store at one point. Of course, Tooth and Nail, I think, is probably my favorite Dokken album. Was able to pick this one back up. And of course, Back for the Attack, great run of albums there in the 80s. Dokken comes back with Dysfunctional, which I think is quite the underrated album. Pretty killer stuff right here. We're not going to talk about Shadow Life. And then we get to Erase the Slate, which I think is also a really good late 90s Dokken record. So after that, Dokken does get a little more hit and miss to me. Long Way Home features some real bangers. Hell to Pay features some real bangers. Ultimately, maybe those two albums should have been like, take the best songs from each and put them onto one, and you'd have one hell of a great record. And, of course, over the years, I think Don's obviously lost his voice and whatnot, but doesn't take away from the great run of albums they gave us back in the day and some of the great music that they have given us since reforming. So, in the number 42 spot is Dokken. Number 41, and the last band that we're going to go over in this video, I've got Staind. I don't know if you would call them nu metal or what, but they were one of those bands that really broke it big kind of in the early 2000s with Break the Cycle, their third album, but their breakthrough. And much like System of a Down's Toxicity, I just remember seeing this album cover all over the place. Every time I turned around, it seemed like I was staring at either this or the Toxicity album cover. And I actually do remember the song, It's Been a While, right off the bat, and I also remember not really caring for it, which put Staind out of my mind for a long time. I never really gave them another thought, until a good friend of mine, we worked together, and then we would kind of start hanging out outside of work, and he would start playing Staind songs when we were hanging out, and songs other than It's Been a While, songs like Epiphany, Outside, So Far Away, Zoe Jane, among some others. And it just kind of occurred to me, it's like, you know what, I actually do kind of like all these other songs from Staind that he's been playing, and even some of them I actually recognized and just didn't realize that it was Staind. So that was when I decided to kind of give them thoroughly a chance and checked out some of their albums and picked up like your Break the Cycle, 14 Shades of Grey, Chapter 5, all with great songs that I had heard and just didn't realize that it was Staind. And I loved them. I thought it was, fantastic stuff. To me, to this day, It's Been a While is probably still one of, if not my least favorite Staind song. But, like on Break the Cycle, you've got stuff like Open Your Eyes and Pressure, Fade, Epiphany, Suffer is really good, For You's really good, Outside's really good. 14 Shades of Grey has my favorite Staind song, How About You. It's also got Price to Play, So Far Away, Yesterday, a bunch of songs that rhyme apparently. Chapter 5, you got Runaway, Paper Jesus, Falling, Everything Changes, King of All Excuses. This, maybe not their strongest album here, but some really good songs. Believe is a song that I didn't realize was Staind when it came out, but I always did kind of like the song. All I Want is great. Lost Along the Way is great. And of course you've got your self-titled, which I love a lot. And then the one that they released just a couple years ago, Confessions of the Fallen, which has some really good stuff on it as well. So one of those bands that I sort of judged prematurely because I didn't like their biggest hit, and unfortunately, I guess I was wrong for doing so because I find that I like most everything else that they've done. Another band that I've done that to actually is Shinedown, who is not in my top 50. They are an honorable mention, which I'll probably throw in here. Hopefully, on my last, when I do like my top 10, I'll throw in the honorable mentions. But, Shinedown, I never really liked the song Second Chance. So I sort of wrote Shinedown off for the longest time because of that. Come to find out, I actually do like a lot of their songs, and Second Chance is one of my least favorite songs from the band. So, yeah, number 41, I've got Stained. So, let me know in the comments your thoughts on any of these bands. If you happen to be a fan of any of them, let me know. Give me some of your favorite bands as well. If you like this kind of content, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and keep your eye out for my next video in this series, which will be talking about bands number 40 through 31. And I will catch you next time.